All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Torah Studies, our weekly look at the Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is Vayikra. Vayikra. Okay, so this is the beginning of the book of Leviticus, and Leviticus is the third book of the Torah. I'll tell you another name for Leviticus. Oh, and the Chumash, it's on page what? Page 600? 618, 619. Okay, so here we go. Leviticus is very unique. So it seems like the first two books follow pretty, I'm going to use the word sensible, but that sounds like I'm saying something's not sensible, but a pretty intuitive, logical progression. So it begins with the beginning, right? That kind of makes sense. Book of Genesis begins with the beginning. That's a great place to start. It kind of unfolds some basic highlights of creation. 6 days of creation, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the 12 tribes, Joseph, Egypt. The book of Exodus picks up the story. Jews in Egypt, slavery, Pharaoh, plagues, Exodus, splitting of the sea, 10 commandments. You're wondering why it takes so long to go through this when we're doing it so fast. Anyway, standing at Sinai, 10 commandments, getting the Torah and the law, the sin of the golden calf, building a tabernacle, and that's kind of where we are. Now we have a Mishkan, we're in the desert, Exodus has happened, and things are cool. The next book of the Torah kind of stops the storytelling. Not that there's no storytelling in the book of Leviticus, but it's not narrative driven, and now it's more commandment driven. It's more mitzvah driven. So you open up the book of Leviticus, and you have, okay, these are the sacrifices, these are the laws, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do. There's a lot of laws. Now I know, even in Exodus, there was the Torah portion of Mishpatim, which detailed laws, and Torah portions of Truma Tetzava also detailed how to build a Mishkan. But yet, in general, Genesis and Exodus, Bereshis and Shmos are more narrative fueled, whereas Leviticus, Vayikra, is more a mitzvah, commandment based. The book of Numbers, by the way, gets back to narrative, talks about the journeys of the Jewish people in the desert and the drama that happens there throughout the 40 years journey. And Deuteronomy is kind of a repetition, Moses speaking to the people, so it's a repetition, so you have some narrative, some laws, and it's a bit of a hybrid. Leviticus is very unique. In fact, I know some yeshivas, some schools, when they're studying Chumash, they'll skip this book because for young kids. Now, I will tell you something else. Young kids, when they first start learning Torah, Chumash, inside, begin with the book of Leviticus. It's a pure book about pure offerings and sacrifices, so those that are pure children, so the custom is to study the beginning of Vayikra. But you study just a few verses, then you close it out, and then you go back to wherever it is. Then you have your Chumash party or whatever goes on with that. So that's how, but nonetheless, later on, when children are kind of going through the stories and going through the narratives, it's not unheard of to jump from Exodus to Numbers. Because again, in the narrative, it's more, it flows better to jump from there to there. Leviticus, a student, especially a young student, can get stuck. It's a little bit tedious. Why is it called Leviticus? First of all, let's talk about the Hebrew. What does the word Vayikra mean? Yeah, and he called, and it's referring to God. So he in the uppercase. So Vayikra Moshe, God called to Moses. Now the word Vayikra, in and of itself, and he called. It could be like, and he spoke, or and he went, and he said. It doesn't seem to be a great title in the Hebrew for an entire book. If you're calling a book by the title, and he called, how does that work? The Rebbe explains that calling, the word Vayikra in Hebrew, unlike the word Vayedaber or Vayomer, which means and he spoke or he commanded, or Vayitzava and he commanded, whatever it is, outside of those other words, the word Vayikra means God called Moses, and calling, Vayikra, is a Lashon Shel Chiba. What is Chiba?
Chiba is like love.
Love.
Not love. It's
affection.
Affection.
Yeah. It's a Vayikra is. It's a calling of affection where God calls Moshe, God calls Moses affectionately. And the idea here is it shows the love that God has for us and the love that we have for Him by giving the offerings and the sacrifices, giving up something to God and for God. So hence Vayikra does capture the theme of the book, which is an act of love from God to us and reciprocated by acts of love and dedication and giving from us to Him. So that's a little bit about the Hebrew. What does the English word Leviticus mean? What's the shoresh? What's the root of the English word Leviticus? What's the first half? Levi, right? Levi. It's the book of the Levites. The tribe of Levi. They comprised the priests and what we call the Levim, the Levites, but they were all from the tribe of Levi. And the temple or the Mishkan, the tabernacle service, the offerings and putting it up, taking it down and moving it, transporting it, singing it, all of that was handled by either the priests or the Levites, hence the term Leviticus. It's all about the priests. In fact, there is another Hebrew term that captures the book of Vayikra, and it's Torat Kohanim, which is the laws of the priests. And that's kind of like Leviticus, where it evokes this idea of who it's for and what it talks about, i.e. the Levim. Now, keep the Chumashim open, because we're going to jump in there in a moment. But I want to...
Vayikra Adam.
Oh, Vayikra Ha'adam.
No.
Shemot.
No,
That's Adam. That's the original.
Yeah.
Listen, that's Adam. Adam called the animals, maybe also affectionately. Who knows? Okay, so let's turn to the opening text, which is a commentary from Ramban, from Nachmanides. In his introduction to the book, the great commentaries would not just write a commentary on the actual verses and on the text, scripture itself, but they would write sometimes introductions to each book. What is the theme of the book? And here we have Nachmanides telling us the theme of the book of Vayikra, all about the Levim. Text number 1. David, please begin.
What page are you on?
We are on page 215.
This book contains the laws of the priests and Levites. All matters pertaining to the sacrifices and to the tabernacle's upkeep are explained in it. Just as there is a book pertaining to the enslavement of Israel and the subsequent Exodus, culminating with the topic of the tabernacle and God's glory which filled it, the following book contains commandments of the sacrifices and the tabernacle's upkeep, so that the sacrifices will atone for the Jewish people and their sins will not cause the divine presence to depart. God commands the priests who approach God to sanctify themselves. He warns us against allowing any impurity on the sanctuary and its holy artifacts, and forbids us from unrestrictedly approaching the sanctuary, as the verse states, and God said to Moses, "Speak to your brother Aaron that he should not come at all times into the holy within the dividing curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, so that he should not die. For I appear over the ark cover in a cloud." This is analogous to the warning at Sinai. God said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people, lest they break their formation to go nearer to God, to see, and many of them will fall." The sanctuary should then be cordoned off, just as Mount Sinai was cordoned off when the glory of the God of Israel was there.
And I prefer to think of it as kind of like, those velvet ropes with those metal poles thing, that type of...
Most of this book deals with the loss of the sacrifices, of those who many offer them, and of where they may be offered. A few other related mitzvot are recorded in it. And most chapters of this book are addressed to the priests. For example, "Speak to Aaron and his sons," and "Command Aaron and his sons." The portion of Kedoshim Tihiyu contains a few commandments to the children of Israel mostly relating to the sacrifices. I will explain them in their proper place with God's help.
Thank you. So Ramban Nachmanides explains a little bit of the narrative nature and why it follows the book of Exodus. But nonetheless, I think his point is clear, abundantly clear, and that is the book primarily deals with the Mishkan, the tabernacle, the sacrifices, those who brought the sacrifices, and what they were supposed to do and not supposed to do. You should know, before we jump into the actual text and look at some of the sacrifices, there are multiple types of sacrifices. It wasn't just like one type of sacrifice for one occasion, for one purpose. There were many different sacrifices. So I want to give you a very brief who, what, where, when of sacrifices. You guys ready? So who? Who would bring sacrifices? So there were two general categories. Either individuals could bring sacrifices. So as an individual, you could bring a sacrifice. And this was true for men, women, Jew, non-Jew. Anybody could offer a sacrifice in the Beis HaMikdash, number one. There were also communal offerings brought on behalf of the entire Jewish people. And those offerings were brought, I should mention, when we say that anyone could bring an offering, they had to be actually sacrificed. The ritual had to be done by the priest, but the one bringing the offering could be nearby or at a certain place, kind of observing what was going on, but not actually doing the service, but it would be brought on their behalf. So again, who could bring a sacrifice? Who, what, where, when? Who? Anybody, individually, or it could be done on behalf of the community, and these had different laws. So the private offerings or communal offerings, those were two different categories, and within them, there were subcategories. Let's talk about other divisions. Who, what? What would they bring? Okay, I should also mention, whether it was an individual or a community, individual offerings could either be voluntary or obligatory. So obligatory would mean, let's say a person did something wrong. So one of the ways to get atonement would be to bring an offering. So that we would call that an obligatory. Now, somebody didn't want to bring it, and you're not going to force someone to bring it. But again, it's obligatory in the sense that at this point, they become now obligated by the law to bring an offering for atonement. Or, for example, somebody who, like a woman who gives birth. So part of the process is a few weeks after she gives birth, she's required by Jewish law to bring an offering in the temple. Or a mitzora, someone who had sarat, leprosy. So after the healing process, they had to bring an offering. Or someone who became a nazir. I could go on, by the way. Someone who became a nazir, an Nazirite, who took a vow of abstention for a certain amount of time to not cut hair and not drink wine and not come in contact with impurity. After that period is over, they had to bring an offering. So there were certain individual offerings that were mandatory, obligatory by Jewish law. There were other forms of offerings that were voluntary. What's a voluntary offering? Well, very simple. Somebody says, you know what, I want to bring an offering to God. I love God, or I'm grateful, or Thanksgiving, right. And that might fall into the category of obligatory, like if that thing happens to you specifically, and there are 4 categories of Thanksgiving offerings. Somebody who was sick and got healed, someone who crossed an ocean or crossed a desert or got out of prison. Those are 4 occasions in which one was to bring an offering. Now that's a personal offering of Thanksgiving. It would be interesting to see how it's categorized. Is it voluntary, but we're told give it? Or is it obligatory? If these things happen, then you have to give it. I'm actually not exactly sure. But there are other forms of voluntary offerings, and that is if somebody was just, the mood struck, they just felt like, you know what, I want to bring an offering to God. I want to show God how much I love Him and how grateful I am, whatever it is. So a person could bring an offering. Now, when it comes to communal offerings, typically communal offerings were brought on a set schedule. As we'll discuss soon, that's going to be a mainstay of tonight's, a major idea of tonight's class, the communal offerings that happen every single day and also on special occasions. So there were communal offerings that were brought on behalf of the entire Jewish nation on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis. I'm talking about every day, Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, on a holiday basis, and there were other times and occasions that they would be brought at set times. In addition to this, there are certain times where you had to, the entire community had to bring an offering because something happened. Typically something not good happened. So for example, if there was a mistaken ruling set forth by the high priest or by Jewish leadership, and they mistakenly told the community that something was okay when it wasn't okay, they found out it wasn't okay, the entire community has to bring an offering. And again, it's one offering on behalf of the entire community, but that's in a case of kind of like an case where you would bring an offering. Anyway, there are different forms of offerings. Now, what type of animals are brought? Okay. Unblemished. But when it comes to the types of animals, in addition to the fact that it has to be a healthy animal, unblemished, you can't give that one's struggling. Let's give it anyway to God, right? You can't do that. Yeah, it's like that one's not keeping up perfect. No, do not do that. So, in addition to that, in addition to the animal having to be pure and healthy, there were different types of animals or different types of sacrifice that could be brought. You could have animal offerings from cattle, you could have bird offerings, different types of birds, and you could have meal offerings. You could bring meal offerings made of flour, sometimes mixed with something else, sometimes on its own. There were libations, wine that was poured, water on occasion was poured on the altar, and those are some of the things that were brought. So who, what, where, okay, that's easy, the temple, and when we discussed, I think, as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about the offerings. And again, within each category, there are subcategories. So you have a lot of different, total number of possible sacrifices that could be brought. You have, it's pretty broad. There are a lot of potential, combinations of offerings that could be brought. So now, with that in mind, let's begin. And I want to ask you to identify, based on the opening verses, what type of offering it is. And I know I didn't get super comprehensive, but I think I gave you enough that you can tell me about these offerings. Oh, I need to mention one more thing. Some offerings were burnt completely on the altar, So they would take the animal, shech the animal, and then slaughter the animal, and then put it on the altar, and it would be consumed by fire, totally given to God. Some offerings, only part of it was consumed on the fire on the altar. The rest was eaten by the priests and or the person who offered the offering. The ones that were burnt completely were called the karban olah. Ola! No. Ola. Ole. Something like that. Ola. Ola is a burnt offering. And the one that's eaten by the priests and the person who brought it is called the shlamim. The shlamim. Shlamim. Karban shlamim. Okay. With that in mind, let's bounce into the text. 619 in the Chumash.
So next time she burns the food, it will be
Karban olah. Say olah. Exactly. You're talking theoretically, not that actually would happen, but yeah. That's a good way to look at it. Mm-hmm. In a Jewish house, when somebody breaks a dish, what do you say? Mazel tov. Congratulations, right? We're trained right at the beginning, right at the chasana, right? Somebody's clumsy. Every single wedding. I've never seen a wedding, a traditional chuppah, where the groom wasn't clumsy. He's clumsy. He breaks the glass.
He's paralyzed.
And instead of...
He's not clumsy, paralyzed.
Paralyzed, right, exactly. It's the last time he's going to put his foot down. Anyway, whatever. So, sorry, Dr. Fay. Caught you mid. Anyway, the point is that it's a message in life, and that is when something breaks, mazel tov. It could have been worse. It's only a dish. It's only a glass. Okay, 619. Ray, please read the first few lines.
When a man from among you brings a voluntary offering to God, you should bring your offering from domesticated animals, from cattle, which has not been worshipped as an idol, or from flocks which have not been set aside for pagan worship, and from those which have not killed people.
Okay, continue please. Oh, it's giving it away. Oh well, I tried. I do what I can. 621, please read the first, really the first line is fine.
The burnt offering from cattle. If his offering is a burnt offering taken from cattle, he should bring a perfect, unblemished male animal.
Okay, and then it continues. There's a lot of details here, a lot of bullet points. The third bullet point says he should put his hands on the burnt offering. It should be accepted by God, etc. Talks about skinning the burnt offering, cutting it to pieces, whatever, arranging the wood, putting it on the fire.
A lot of bull hit points.
Well done. Well done. I love it. A lot of bullet points about the burnt offering. So this is clearly an individual offering. It's a voluntary offering, right? So which sacrifice, which carbon bucket does it fall into? So it's being brought by an individual voluntarily, and he or she is choosing to bring a burnt offering that will be completely consumed. And in that case, the Torah tells us which type of animal and the process of exactly how it's done. So let's flip some pages and we'll just look at some headers and see what it's talking about. So we have here the burnt offering from cattle on 621. 623, we have the burnt offering from sheep and goats.
That was my other question, is could you not bring a sheep or a goat?
Yeah, well, yes, you could bring cattle, a bull, right? Or you could bring sheep and goats. And on 625 now you have birds. And by the way, these are less expensive as we go. You know, it's much more expensive to buy a big bull than to purchase a bird. So it is. Except for the talking bird and the famous story of the talking bird. Do you guys know the story? One of my favorite stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know the story?
I don't.
The freezer story.
Yes.
It's a fantastic story. It's a fantastic story.
It is.
A fellow is walking by a pet shop and he hears a bird reciting Shakespeare. He says, "This is impossible. There's a bird reciting Shakespeare." And then it starts singing Pavarotti. Right? Is that how you pronounce his name?
Yes.
Okay. And this bird is so talented, it's unbelievable. So he walks over to the pet store owner and he says, tell me about this bird. He tells him the history of the bird, how the bird is trained in the fine arts. He says, unbelievable. I've never seen anything. I didn't know this was possible. I said, listen, welcome to the 21st century. Anything's possible. So the man says, how much? He says, look, it's going to cost you a lot of money. How much? $10,000. $10,000 for a bird. Okay, I'm going to do it. He does it. He purchases the bird, takes the bird home, and almost immediately the bird drops all of the cultured birdness. Now that it's purchased, the bird reverts to vulgarity, and it's literally vulgar. It's offensive. It's offensive to this fellow. Berates him, mocks him, makes fun of him, copies him, scoffs at him. Everything. Puts him down. Eventually, one day he's had enough. He takes the bird out of frustration. Takes the parrot and he puts it into the fridge. Figures it'll cool him down. Sorry, into the freezer. Closes the freezer door. And almost immediately the bird is silent. And he's thinking, oh, thank God, finally, a little bit of a break from this tweeting, this chirping, this talking. A minute passes, still no sound. And at this point, he's getting a little concerned. He waits another 30 seconds and he figures he better open up this freezer. You know, who knows what this mix of bird and freezer could do. He opens it up, and to his relief, the bird is healthy. But the bird is looking very contrite and apologetic. And the bird says, I must apologize for everything I've ever said to you that was negative from the time that you purchased me until this day. I apologize. I will never do this again. And I want you to know that I am sincere in my apology. And the man says, that's amazing.
Teshuvah. But
that's tshuva, total teshuvah, repentance, return, restoration. But tell me what brought this on? And the man says, it's amazing. I accept your apology. And the bird says, thank you. But one question that I have for you. And the man says, what? He says, tell me, what did the chicken do? What did the chicken do? Anyway, the freezer chicken. The parrot is looking at frozen chicken and saying, Gewalt, I don't want that to be me. I'm going to be on my best behavior. Okay, so now we can bring it from birds. Let's continue. Page 629. All right, this is from the south. 629, we have the deep fried meal offering. Right? Deep fried meal offering. We have the Omer offering, bottom of 629. 631, we have more stuff. Peace offering. The peace offering is the one that the owners and the Kohen eats. Why peace? Because everyone gets a piece. No, because everyone is happy. That is true. But everyone is happy. Both the altar is happy, or the altar's happy, the priest is happy, and the owner's happy. Everyone gets a part of the animal. So that's called the shlum, the peace offering. You could bring that also from cattle, from sheep and goats. It talks about then on 633 the sin offering, the high priest sin offering, the communal sin offering, the leader's sin offering, The variable sin offering, that's like a fluctuating APR, right? Depending on how the market's doing, it's your variable sin offering. There's a guilt offering as distinct from a sin offering on 645. The guilt offering on cases of doubt, guilt offering for dishonesty. As I said before, there are many types of offerings. Within each offering, sometimes there are multiple varieties. You could bring this animal or that animal. So again, you have many different possible offerings that could be brought at any given moment. I want to focus now for a moment
On the leader's sin offering?
No, not that. Although it's very interesting. The leader's sin offering is really interesting, but not today's topic. Let's jump into the peace offering, which is on page. Actually, but let's do it inside the Torah studies text. Let's do it in the Torah studies text. You can find it on page 218. Sorry, I think we're up to you. Page 218, text 3a.
If his sacrifice is a peace offering, if he brings it from cattle, whether male or female, unblemished, he shall bring it before God. And he shall lean his hand forcefully upon the head of the sacrifice and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And Aaron's descendants, the Kohanim, shall dash the blood upon the altar around. And from the peace offering he shall bring a fire offering to God comprised of the fat covering the innards and all the fat that is on the innards. And he shall bring the 2 kidneys along with the fat that is upon them, which is over the flank. And he shall remove the diaphragm with the liver along with the kidneys.
All of these are the parts of this offering that are burned as opposed to being eaten. Because there were parts that were eaten, but these are the parts that were to be burned. Continue.
And Aaron's descendants shall cause it to go up in smoke on the altar, apart from the burnt offering which is on top of the wood that is on the fire. It is a fire offering with a pleasing fragrance to God.
So here we have the shlomim offering, the carbon shlomim, which is eaten. Parts of it are eaten by the Kohen and the person who brought it. But there are also parts. It's divided into 3 basically. So one for me, one for you, and one for the altar. And the parts for the altar, certain fats, certain kidneys, whatever. It was detailed there. Yeah. So all of that, those items were burnt. But interestingly, the Torah says a very interesting idea. It says that Aaron's descendants, i.e. the Kohanim, the priests, should cause these parts of this sacrifice to burn, go up in smoke on the altar, apart from the burnt offering. Those were the offerings that were totally burnt. But it says apart from the burnt offering. What exactly does it mean, apart from the burnt offering? Was there a separate fire? What does it mean? So look at Rashi. Please do text 3b as well, please, sir.
Apart from the burnt offering. From here we learn that the daily burnt offering precedes any other sacrifice from the wood pile of the altar.
So Rashi points out, and obviously he takes this from a classic teaching of our sages, when the Torah tells us by the peace offering, which was an individual, a private individual who decides voluntarily to bring a peace offering, and the Torah says that the part of his offering that should be burnt separate or apart from the burnt offering. Rashi says, quoting our sages, what that means is there was a daily burnt offering, which we'll introduce in a moment, known as the Karban Tamid. Karban Tamid means a consistent, continuous offering brought every single day, morning and afternoon. So what the Torah is teaching us is anyone who wants to bring a private offering or any other offerings need to be sandwiched or bookended by the communal daily offerings. The first offering, the first thing on the wood, on the altar, being burnt, was the communal Karban Tamid, the daily offering. That was always brought first in the morning, and that was always the last offering brought in the evening or toward evening. Those were the bookends. Everything else is in addition to it, apart from it, after or before it, but separate from it. These bookended the experience. Now, where are the details of the daily offering mentioned? Well, some details are actually mentioned in the next book of the Torah, the book of Numbers. So let's read that. Steve, please read text number 4, page 220.
God spoke to Moses, saying, "Command the children of Israel, and say to them, my offering, my food for my fire offerings, a spirit of satisfaction for me, you shall take care to offer to me at its appointed time. And you shall say to them, this is the fire offering that you shall offer to God, 2 unblemished lambs in their first year, each day as a continual burnt offering. And 1 lamb you shall offer up in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer up in the afternoon.
So God says there are karbanot, there are sacrifices that are to be brought on a daily basis, consistently every single day. 2 lambs, 2 unblemished, healthy lambs. Keves echad ta'aseh baboker, keves hasheni ta'aseh bein ha'arbayim. 1 in the morning and 1 in late afternoon. Those are the 2 daily offerings brought on behalf of the community, and they needed to bookend all the other offerings. It's because of these, or in commemoration of these daily offerings, that we have daily prayers established at those very same times. The first thing that we do in the morning is we have the morning prayers known as shacharit. And shacharit is aligned with the morning tamid that was brought in the temple. This is discussed in text 5. We're not going to read this inside. This is something that we've discussed previous classes many times, many other occasions. So we have a lot of other things to get to. So I'm paraphrasing text 5. Text 5 basically says there are 2 set offerings for the community every single day. So we have 2 set communal daily prayers, 1 in the morning and 1 in the afternoon. Shacharit in the morning and mincha in the afternoon. In addition to this, all of the items that needed to be burned from the offerings that were brought during the day but didn't have a chance to burn, remember, there might have been a waiting list, if you will, of animal and sacrificial parts, if you will, that needed to be consumed on the altar, and the altar was only a certain amount of size. So sometimes you had a bit of a backlog, if you will. So what would happen is the priests were allowed to burn it all night. You had to slaughter the sacrifice, the tamid, while it was still afternoon, but you could do the burning all night until the next morning, until daybreak of the next morning. In commemoration of the time of the burning that happened at night, we have the 3rd daily prayer, which is the Ma'ariv prayer, the nightly prayer. So we have the morning prayer for the morning offering, the afternoon prayer for the afternoon offering, and the nightly prayer for the burning of the animals that happened on the altar, that happened at night. Now, in addition,
on Shabbat.
on Shabbat they would they would slaughter an animal, which otherwise would be a violation of Shabbat. They would slaughter an animal. The same God that said, don't do this, usually says do this.
Okay, got it.
It was an exception.
Okay.
So
Within the walls of the temple, those specific things were allowed. But and they brought, as we'll say in a moment, not only were the 2 daily offerings brought, there was an extra offering for Shabbat, known as the Karban Musaf. Musaf means additional. It's the additional offering, which is why, no surprise, on Shabbat, we have an additional prayer that we recite. Not only do we have services Friday night for the night prayers, and Shabbat morning, and Shabbat afternoon, we have Shabbat late morning, an extra prayer, known as Musaf. Why Musaf? Because in the temple, they brought an extra offering every Shabbat. Where is that told? That's text 6a, which we'll get to in a moment. Did someone have a question?
I did. I just, when you talk about Ma'ariv, were they actually making another offering, or was that just the burning?
Burning.
Okay. So
which is why Ma'ariv prayer is not obligatory. Shacharit and Mincha prayers are obligatory. Ma'ariv is considered to be a reshut, which means it's up to a person's discretion. Now the custom is to do it, and we do it anyway. We do it consistently. But again, it doesn't have it's not the same as the other 2. It's a little bit different.
All right, so I want to be clear on what you said. So
Sure.
you said that the obligatory sacrificial morning sacrifice went on first. Then
Yes.
if there was a, quote, backlog, if you will,
Yes.
of people wanting to, whatever, bring their offerings, as long as they were slaughtered between the morning
Yes.
sacrifice and the evening communal
Yes.
sacrifice, they could be slaughtered, but they could be burnt.
Yes.
After
Correct.
the evening sacrifice,
Correct.
communal sacrifice was put on the altar, it could burn for the rest of the night to
Correct.
make sure it
It got in
It
before
got in
daybreak
there
of the
and got
next
in
day.
before the okay, got
Exactly.
it. All right, I got
And
it.
if it didn't, then it wouldn't.
It didn't count.
It didn't count.
Yeah, okay, got
But it
it.
had to be at least by the next morning. Now let's take a look at the Musaf, because we mentioned Musaf, the extra Shabbat and holiday offering and prayer. Text 6a. Wait, hold on. Who just read? Steve, you already read, right? Tim, what to you?
Musaf is just like Shmona Esrei, isn't it?
Today, that's what it is. Today, that's what. When we say Musaf today, we refer to the extra Amida, Shmona Esrei, that we say on Shabbat or on festivals. But the origins are literally an extra offering that was brought. In addition to the morning and afternoon offering, there was an extra offering that was brought every Shabbat and holiday. And that's why we have an extra prayer. Tim, please read 2:22.
On the Sabbath day, 2 unblemished lambs in the first year, and 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a meal offering, mixed with oil and its libation. This is the burnt offering of each Sabbath on its Sabbath, in addition to the daily burnt offering and its libation.
You see that? That last line? There's a special Shabbat burnt offering in addition to the daily offering, which is 2 lambs, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, late afternoon, early evening. In addition to that, there was a special Shabbat offering. That's why on Shabbat we have the night prayer, we have the morning prayer, we have mincha, but in between we have a special Musaf prayer in commemoration of this extra offering. And again, same deal with the holidays, Passover, Sukkot, etc. They would bring an extra holiday offering, and today we recite an extra holiday prayer, an extra Amidah, Shmona Esrei, in commemoration of that, and that's discussed in text 6b. Okay, so what we're going to get to now is...
All right, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the meal offering, all right,
Yes.
obviously that's grain.
Yes.
All right, so is
Flour.
libation fermented grain?
No, libation is wine,
Okay,
typically.
fruit.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So you had representation from different elements. You had like the earth, you had vegetation, you had animals, and people doing their thing. Now, oh, no, people were bringing it. No, we didn't. Well, if someone got out of line, no. But I mean, it involved human effort to bring
So
it.
they were like that parent,
Yeah, exactly.
If there was an altercation.
Altercation. Well done. Wow, that's very good. I thought of another one as one of the texts was being read, but I forgot it already. Okay, maybe it'll come back. Altercation is good. Okay, now, so the question that we're going to get to, and it's really kind of like a question that's more of like a launching point for discussion, is when it comes to the daily offerings, which are known as the Tamid, what we find is that there are daily, and these were for the community at large, they were obligatory communal offerings. There were ones that had to be brought every single day. And then there were other offerings that were only brought on special occasions, either weekly on Shabbat or on the holidays. The question is, every mitzvah, even one that harkens back to very ancient times, every mitzvah has a practical, spiritual, psychological, emotional parallel. Now I know, when it comes to the sacrifices, we don't even need that type of parallel because we have a literal prayer parallel which we've been discussing. But nonetheless, there's also a personal parallel that every mitzvah, no matter what, has. And the question is, what is the personal application of the Karban Tamid, of the daily communal sacrifice versus the special occasion communal sacrifice? What is the deeper message, the personal message about that duality of things that are brought consistently and then things that are brought once in a while, out of the blue, if you will, or not out of the blue necessarily, but once in a while, not on a consistent basis? The truth is, we have the same duality. And again, what's the duality? Things that are constant versus things that are intermittent. We have that also when it comes to mitzvot in general. There are certain mitzvot that are constant. In fact, we're going to have text 7 from the Chinuch, Sefer Chinuch, talks about 6 mitzvot that we're always needing to do at every single moment of the day. Then there are daily mitzvot, then there are weekly mitzvot, then there are monthly mitzvot, and then there are ones that are occasional, maybe once a year, maybe once in a lifetime. So there are different segments, different frequencies, not like radio frequencies, but different types of How frequent is a mitzvah? And the question that we're going to ask is, what is the symbolism? What does it mean that some mitzvot are constant and some are intermittent? And what's the message for us? Text number 7. Let's take a look at the 6 constant mitzvot. Jillian.
And almost every mitzvah is not constant. Rather, it is observed at certain times of the year or of the day. There are 6 exceptions, 6 mitzvot whose obligations are constant and do not cease for a person for even a moment all his days.
Isn't that a great introduction? Here are 6 mitzvot that you always have to do. This is like BuzzFeed. All right. Continue.
They are to believe in God, not to believe in anything besides for God, to unify Him, to fear Him, to love Him, not to go astray after the thoughts of the heart and the sight of the eyes.
And this is something that he says. This is the Sefer HaChinuch who writes that, Rabbi Aaron Bar Salon, and he says, these are 6 mitzvot that you and I can constantly be occupied in doing or not doing, right? Not to believe in anything besides for God is something not that we're doing, but something that we're not doing, whatever. But the point is, these are constant mitzvot. And then you have daily mitzvot, such as wrapping tefillin or praying, like we mentioned, saying the Shema twice a day. Yeah.
The not part seems very difficult because
it's not a constant.
It's like saying, don't think of a zebra.
Right. Oh man, I just did.
I mean, what's the business?
I totally just, yeah. You're right. Not to believe, but it's not really not to think. It's not to believe in anything besides for God. But then it gets you thinking, well, what else should I? What am I not believing in? Right.
Well, the other one, number 6.
Oh, not to go astray. But you know what? I think that's a very practical one.
It's very practical.
It's very practical because we're always having ideas of like things that are distracting us, right? It doesn't have to be like terrible thoughts or horrific, hopefully not, right? But even just distracting things. You're trying to pray. Take 2 minutes and 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and say the Amidah. And mitamal, in the middle of the prayers, you're thinking about 1,001 things that you have to do, or that what happened to you, or whatever it is. Like, the idea is not to be led, not to follow the whims of the mind and the heart, etc., and the eyes, but to stay focused.
I was going to say, could he have not, had he chosen, would it be equivocal to say, focus only on the thoughts of God, the prayers to God?
That would be, I guess, a positive. That would be the flip side of that. To focus and not to follow the eyes and the heart leading astray, but to focus on where you need to focus.
Be focused and not distracted.
Correct. Okay. My assumption is the reason why you chose this language is because it says in the Shema, and don't be led astray after the thoughts. It seems like he's lifting the quote straight from that segment from the Shema. But yeah, however we want to understand it, the point is that this is something that we can constantly do or constantly be careful of not doing, but it's an every single moment thing. Whereas when it comes to wrapping tefillin, we do it once a day. When it comes to saying the Shema, twice a day. When it comes to, it's not constant though. We're not constantly saying Shema, 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 Shema. Marsha, Marsha, Marsha. It's not always like that. It's not always a mitzvah, a binding mitzvah. It's something that comes around, once a day. And then there are ones that come around once a week, like Shabbat and all that stuff. And then there are ones that come around once a month, Rosh Chodesh. Then there are ones that come about once a year, the holidays. Passover is coming up. I don't want to stress anybody out. Passover, Purim is coming up, but it's not a biblical holiday. Passover is coming up. I know this. The only reason I know this is because I went to Kroger, Togo Hills. I'm telling you, you go to Kroger 3 months out. I've never seen, Jews are never this organized. It's a company from Cincinnati or wherever they're based out of. They are good to go. These guys are on it like nobody's business. And I know for a fact that they've purchased this stuff or put in the orders months ago. Are you kidding me? Who's that organized?
No, they probably ordered.
There's
the end of last
They're throwing out their freezer, too.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right.
They're already out of 2 products.
Are you serious?
The jars of Haroset.
No way.
They were out of it about a week ago. I'm sure they'll restock. And the cardboard boxes of Farfel.
That's crazy.
Also whole wheat matzah.
Wow. Yeah, I like the whole wheat stuff. Listen, I'll tell you. Pesach's coming up, and we have mitzvah. We have mitzvah to buy matzah, mitzvah to eat matzah, wine, matzah, seder plate items, right? Charoset. We have the idea of getting rid of the chametz. These are mitzvot that are once a year. And then you have ones that are once in a blue moon. Well, I don't know if that's the right term, but do you remember a few years ago there was the blessing of the sun?
The sun.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that one? That was awesome. We don't actually bless the sun, but it's thanking God for the sun. You do it once every, I want to say 29 years or something.
Wow.
Something like that.
There's a 9 in there, I know.
Yeah, I think it's 29. So, yeah.
What is the occasion?
It's somehow the cycle when there's a certain cycle when the sun and the moon go back with all their orbits, they're realigned exactly like they were. It happens every, 27, 29, 17, 19, whatever it is, number of years. So it takes that amount of time for it to get exactly aligned. And so we thank God for the precision in creating the universe with such precision that it, thanks, you're looking it up? Yeah, check it up. Kiddush HaChama, blessing of the sun. So we do that every few decades. So that's something, again, it doesn't happen, it's not constant. Is it 28?
That's what this says.
Could be.
28 years, that's
28, okay.
I thought for sure it was
all right.
Year.
Listen, it could be even, no problem. So 28 years, every 28 years, everything.
Yeah, for once in 28 year mitzvah, and it's on Chabad.org.
Well, it's legit. It's got to be legit. On Chabad.org, So every 28 years, it goes back again to the original alignment, and that's why the Jewish calendar, by the way, you should know, with leap years and everything, it's on a 28-year cycle. And that's why in the Jewish when you turn 28, your Hebrew birthday and your English birthday fall out again on the same day.
Really?
Yeah.
And this was
every 28 years. Every 28 years. So every 28 years, exactly the same alignment comes around again.
Because before you said that, I was thinking to myself, there must be a correlation to the blessing of the sun with the number of days it takes for the moon to complete its full cycle.
Well, here's the thing. Remember,
right?
the moon takes 354 days, and the sun is 365. So that keeps on whatever doing its thing until 28. After 28 years, it lines back up somehow.
That is so
comes
cool.
all the way back around in alignment, exactly the same. So in the Gregorian calendar and the Jewish calendar, so for example, my English birthday is February 20th. My Hebrew birthday is the 23rd of Shvat. So every 28 years, those two will be aligned again. Wow. Every other year, it's going to be off. Either before or after, whatever it is.
Right.
One will be before the other.
But don't you think it does have something to do also with the fact that the moon cycle is about 28 days?
Oh, you're saying the number 28? I'm not sure.
And then
I know it's a very complicated mathematical formula, but it's basically math. It's straight up astronomy and math.
I have a lobby for celebrating both birthdays.
Yes, yeah, and both months.
So I'm just curious though. These 6 mitzvot.
Mm-hmm.
This was written in the Middle Ages by an anonymous author. Surely there have been rabbis disputing these 6.
It's possible, but I think this is pretty legit.
Okay.
These are mitzvot that are kind of general and constant. I think it's a cool list, actually.
It is a cool list.
What we have here, though, is the same duality. We have certain mitzvot that are consistent, and certain ones that come around once in a while. Eating matzah once in a while, it's not a daily thing. And so again, we're trying to understand in this class, what is the interplay between the regular stuff, the consistent stuff, and the stuff that comes around once in a while. And so in order to understand this, let's get back to sacrifices. And I want to share a teaching from the Alter Rebbe, from the founder of Chabad, the great Hasidic master, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who explains that when the opening verses of the book of Leviticus talk about a person bringing a voluntary burnt offering, it's not just telling us about someone who's bringing an actual animal as an offering, but it's also, the message is also for you and I, telling us that in order to really be in a relationship with God, we have to give ourselves and sacrifice part of our inner animal, and we all have an inner animal that tries to schlep us in a negative place. It's about sacrificing a little bit of that inner animal to God. That's how we get into a relationship with God. There's a beautiful text. It's a little bit long though. The text is text 10b. I want to read 10b. I think, Karen, are we up to you? We are.
So.
Okay. If you don't mind reading, if you mind, I'll read it. But if you're good with it,
No, I'm good.
you're good. Okay, 10b.
Okay. It is. Let me take a sip first. No.
Chaim.
That's it. It is a popular notion that every person possesses two souls, a godly soul and an animal soul. The purpose of the soul's descent to this world is to elevate the animal soul by subduing and transforming it. This is accomplished by the godly soul, which is vested within the animal soul and contemplates the one God while reciting Shema Yisrael, which leads one to love God with both inclinations, with the animal soul and the godly soul. This is a meaning of when a person brings from you, meaning literally from you, when a person brings his soul to God.
And it's the animal soul.
Therefore, the word mikem, from you, is stated after the words ki yakriv, will bring. The verse did not state when a person from you will bring, for that would only have expressed the simple meaning that a physical person should bring his sacrifice. But in stating a person who will bring from you, the verse alludes to this internal sacrifice of one's animal soul.
So the opening verses of Leviticus, which talk about a person bringing an offering, it doesn't say a person from you who wants to bring an offering. It says a person who wants to bring an offering from you, which means that the offering is coming from and of the person themselves. And obviously there's a literal meaning, but this is the spiritual meaning, that a person, to get close to God, sometimes we have to give up a little bit of ourselves and let things go and sacrifice some things in order to be in a closer relationship with God. Continue.
Now, the words from cattle or from flock refer to two distinct types of animal souls.
Remember we said you could bring different types of animals as an offering? So now he gets into what's the spiritual and internal corollary. It's different people have different types of inner animals, as he'll discuss. This is very cool.
Some people are like cattle, exhibiting strong character. For example, a person who by nature possesses a strong measure of the evil trait of anger. He is referred to by the moniker cattle due to his boiling nature. Others are not heated by nature. Their evil lies in the fact that they have physical desires. Such a person's animal soul can be likened to herd animals who do not gore. To the contrary, they speak with a merciful voice, but they are full of desires. All of this needs to be subdued.
So the bull is like a bull in a china shop, very angry and very, it can be very hurtful, if you will. So that's one type of animal soul. That's one type of challenge that some people have, and other people have different types of challenges. They're very hedonistic or materialistic, and that's kind of like the example of the sheep, which is not so. It's not goring. It's not very brute and whatever, but in its own way, it's into its own passions. Continue, please.
This is the meaning of from cattle or from flock you shall bring your sacrifice. Each person should, according to his awareness of his own personality and nature, seek to subdue the necessary trait, and then it will have a lasting effect.
How amazing is this, right? A few hundred years ago, such psychological terminology and application. This is why it's amazing. This is the founder of Chabad. So it's a beautiful idea, and really that last paragraph reminds me of the fact that it's very easy to sacrifice someone else's animal.
Yes.
It's much harder to sacrifice your own, right? Because you notice the animal soul in someone else. You're like, you know what the problem with that person is? They always do this, or they can't. It's easy to identify and sacrifice and fix someone else's animal. It's so much harder when it's ours. But we're not meant to sacrifice anyone else's animal. That's the point. We're not meant to fix someone else's problem. Well, of course, we can try to help someone. It's fine. But that's not our task. Is to look inside and to take an honest account of what we need to fix and sacrifice, and then do that. Text 11 summarizes this. We're going to skip this because I want to get to the major idea here. Sacrifices are all about connection to God, giving up oneself to get connected with God. Every mitzvah, likewise, pretty much follows the same theme. Every mitzvah is a point of contact between a human being and God. It's about moving away from the distractions, from the animals within and without, and stepping into a space of God. When we start the Amidah, you know what we do? There's like a physical thing that we do. We take 3 steps back and then 3 steps forward. Why? To signify that we're now stepping into a new space. We were in the world, in synagogue, whatever it is, we were in a certain place, but now as we prepare, I sound like a Delta in-flight commercial. Now, as we prepare to take off, please make sure you're... No, but as we prepare to speak with God, we take some steps back and steps forward to signify entering a new space. Every mitzvah is this theme, and every sacrifice was the same theme. The theme of giving up something of self to get closer to God. Subduing some trait inside that's not so nice to get closer to God. And thus, we now have a way, an angle to understand why there are certain offerings and sacrifices that are consistent, daily, and why others are brought once in a while. Because when it comes to our relationship with God, when it comes to our relationship with God, and our stepping into that space of holiness, there are really 2 values. One value is consistency. There's a value in consistently showing up every single day and saying to God, I am here and I have a purpose and you put me here for that purpose and I'm committed to that purpose every single day. You feel good, you don't feel good. You feel connected, maybe you don't feel connected. You feel high, maybe in a good way, or maybe it's all good, right? But you feel a little holy, you feel inspired, better word, you feel inspired, maybe you don't feel so inspired. It doesn't matter. However you wake up that day, however the day goes, there's a value. One animal in the morning and one animal in the afternoon, every single day, weekday, holiday, Shabbat, blessing of the Sunday, it doesn't make a difference. Every 28-year day, who cares? I'm bringing it every single day. It's showing up. No matter how I feel, what happened, what that person said to me, what I said to someone else, doesn't matter. At this point, I'm bringing my offering. There's a value in that. So how do we become holy? Through consistency and commitment. That's one value. At the same time, there's another value. There were offerings that were only brought intermittently. You know why? Because relationships, this is a relationship with God we're talking about, relationships also thrive. In addition to consistency and commitment, relationships thrive off of excitement and spontaneity and freshness and something new and exciting, and relationships and really life itself is driven and inspired by things that are perhaps not so common or out of the ordinary. That's what makes things exciting and gets us excited. And so the Torah's message is twofold, whether it's regarding the sacrifices or whether it's regarding mitzvot in general. The Torah's message is a dual message. Number 1, be consistent. And number 2, be spontaneous. Be spontaneous. And introduce a measure of excitement. Take on a mitzvah that you haven't done before. Do something extra that you haven't done before. There's a value in, spiritually, practically, there's a value in, from tonight's class, there's a value in every one of us committing to one thing that we're going to do consistently. And there's also a value in committing to one thing to do just because. Out of the ordinary. Something positive to do to just kickstart it and kickstart an excitement in our relationship with God. All of that is one lesson. And I want to mention one more quick lesson and talk about the tablets and give me 90 seconds. Second message of this week's Torah portion and the theme of the offerings is that every day counts. The Talmud, the daily Talmud, reminds us that it's not good enough that I brought the morning and afternoon sacrifice yesterday, or that I'll do it tomorrow. Today is also a day, and I can't skip a day. Right? Consistency. Every day counts, and every day I must infuse that day with something meaningful for that day, because it is a day. Time itself is holy, and I have to fill that time with something holy. I can't just kill a day or kill even an hour. What's this killing time business? Every day has value, and every moment needs to be sanctified. Along these lines, I'm reminded about the tablets, and that's what I wrote in the email. I have to get back to it. I can't just leave you hanging with the email subject. It doesn't make sense. You know, the famous depiction of the tablets is 2 stones with rounded tops. You should know that that is not per Jewish tradition. It's not. I want to debunk the myth of the rounded top tablets. In fact, if you look at sources, and I don't really intend to do sources because we're running out of time, but I just want to point out, highlight text 15. You could study it after, you could read it after the class, and I'll just read the first line. Know that the tablets were box-shaped, 6 handbreadths long by 6 handbreadths wide, etc. It was 6 by 6. It was a square. The tablets were square and had a certain depth to it, but they were square in shape. They were not rectangles with a rounded top. That's simply not. Now, why do we think they are? Probably because a famous artist drew them that way. Why did he draw it that way? You got to ask him. But according to Jewish sources, that's not what the tablets look like. I would trust Jewish sources. They probably heard it ultimately from somebody who was there and saw it, right? It goes back to tradition.
The menorah.
Huh?
The menorah.
The menorah, right. The menorah also is curved. I don't know, artists like, I guess, curved lines, but the menorah was diagonal slanted, and the tablets were square, 2 squares. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe had multiple talks, both debunking the myth of the menorah and the myth of the shape of the menorah and the shape of the tablets. The Rebbe said, you know what's fascinating about this? It all makes sense. Because the Talmud, in tractate, I don't remember, one of the tractates of the Talmud discusses how the size of the ark, remember, the Ark of the Covenant was a box, and inside the box lay the tablets. The Talmud describes how the tablets filled perfectly. The size of the tablets perfectly filled the box of the ark completely. The Rebbe says, if they had rounded tops, it wouldn't have perfectly fitted. There would be a little bit of an area that would be empty. And if God creates a space, you have to fill it completely. It's almost like the tablets couldn't be curved. Because if they were curved, you would have to have a curved ark. But it wasn't curved. It was the ark was a square, rectangle, whatever. It was a box in shape with 90-degree angles. And so the Rebbe points out, and this you can read this again after the class, text 16, the Rebbe points out that when it comes to the tablets and the ark, it reminds us that life itself is holy and divine, and it waits for us to fill it every single day, and ideally every single moment. So, messages from tonight. Number 1, resolutions. Take on something to do consistently. If you've done something once in a while, enough with that excitement. Consistency. And if you haven't done something, now do that once in a while. And then move that consistently, bring something else to the into the hopper, into the bullpen. Anyway, and don't forget, every moment is precious, and fill those moments with meaning. Thank you very much for joining me tonight for Torah studies. You guys are super, super kind. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. You see that? No matter what happened yesterday, no matter